The Rothschilds, 19th century peak power and government relationships. Setting the stage, post-Waterloo Europe. The Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, redrew the map of Europe after Napoleon, created a period of relative stability known as the Concert of Europe. Massive government borrowing needed to rebuild. The Rothschilds were perfectly positioned to meet this need. Their unique position. By 1815, the family had 5 banking houses across major capitals, proven track record with sovereign clients, the most sophisticated information network in Europe, relationships with key government officials everywhere, more capital than virtually any competitor. The government bond business. How it worked. This was the core of Rothschild power in the 19th century, the basic model. Governments needed to borrow enormous sums. They issued bonds to raise capital. The Rothschilds would underwrite these bond issues, meaning they guaranteed the government would receive the money, then sold the bonds to investors across Europe, earning commissions and profits on the price differential. Why governments needed them. No other institution could distribute bonds across multiple countries. No other institution had the credibility to make investors trust the bonds. No other institution could move physical capital reliably across borders. They essentially functioned as the IMF of their era. Major bond operations. Austria. The Habsburg Empire was essentially dependent on Rothschild financing. Salomon Rothschild in Vienna became extraordinarily influential. Austrian Chancellor Prince Metternich developed a close working relationship with Salomon. The Rothschild financed multiple Austrian government bond issues. Salomon was eventually granted the right to live in Vienna, significant because Jews were normally prohibited from residing there. He became one of the most powerful men in the Austrian Empire. Prussia. Similar relationship developed with the Prussian government. Financed post-Napoleonic Reconstruction, Amschel and Frankfurt managed much of this relationship, connected to the broader German state financing network. France. James Rothschild in Paris built an extraordinary operation, financed the French government repeatedly, became arguably the most socially prominent of the brothers. His mansion and salon became centers of Parisian, I think that's how you say it, Parisian high society. Relationships with successive French governments, regardless of political stripe. Financed both royalists and republican governments. Fascinating, right? Back on that playing both sides kind of thing, you know? Britain. Nathan continued to dominate British government financing. N.M. Rothschilds became the primary broker for British government debt. This relationship continued for generations. The firm managed British gold reserve operations. The scale of their operations. Some specific examples. The French War Indemnity, 1818. After Napoleon, France owed massive war reparations. The Rothschilds organized the financing of this payment, demonstrated ability to handle pan-European financial operations. Now I'd like to state, they benefited massively from Napoleon losing the Battle of Waterloo. Go back and say he won just to gain massive wealth because Britain's, all the brokers there sold everything. People were in disarray. He buys up everything. And in turn, 2 countries are now indebted to him. Because France relies on the capital, which they have to pay all these reparations now because they lost and Napoleon defeated. Britain is now indebted to him because the Rothschild owns much of Britain's wealth. And so that leaves them the ability to further play both sides. Britain and France at war for many, many years, prior to this. Brazilian independence, 1822. Helped finance Brazilian independence from Portugal, establishing presence in Latin America, sovereign debt, beginning of their global reach beyond Europe. Take that into account. By 1822, they were able to get into South America. They have plenty of banks within South America. I would like to also state, Venezuela. If you know what happened, the United States took Maduro, their president, out of the country. Big coup. The Rothschilds are very influential within America as well. They said the theory is that they pretty much own our government, and they pay all our politicians. That's theoretical. I'm not gonna make any claims that that's factual. I don't have the information. So, but that is a major theory. And okay, where I was going with that, Maduro and Venezuela don't have a Rothschild bank. And there's a big push right now towards a international digital global currency. I believe that this family is right in the middle of it all, because why? Because if finances are controlled through just them, essentially, or their networks, their systems, think about how much more massive control they have. Why the Venezuela and Maduro is a bigger issue than you may think is because they have one of the largest oil reserves in the world and the largest gold reserves in the world. If currency is to collapse, and take into account that currency is a man-made idea, without something backing currency, it has no value other than the value we give it. And so they need to control all the assets, which would be all these physical assets, gold, oil, in order to make a digital global currency viable. Granted, at this rate, there's also the United States and Israel is at war with Iran, which is also one of the biggest producers. I would say maybe the biggest producer, or at least the Middle East is the biggest producer of oil for the globe, for in every country. That's important. Why? Because Israel, or at least the state of Israel, would not exist without the Rothschild family. And they have been, or at least Israel, I'll say Israel has been wanting to go to war and take over. They have a greater Israel project, and much including Lebanon to their north and Iran to their south, and they want to take it over. Egypt is part of it. They want to take some of Egypt, and that's just food for thought. I'm not going to make any claims, but I find it suspicious. I find it pretty sinister. We're going to leave it there. The Greek independence loan, 1830s. Greece needed financing after independence from Ottoman Empire. Rothschilds involved in organizing these loans showed their reach into emerging nations. Various railway financing. Railway financing transforming the world. Why railways mattered. The railway was the defining technology of the 19th century. Required massive capital investment unlike anything before. Created entirely new financial instruments and markets. Whoever financed railways would shape the physical and economic landscapes of nations. The Rothschild Railway Empire. France, the most dramatic example. James Rothschild in Paris saw the opportunity early. Financed the Chemin de Fer du Nord, the Northern Railway. This became one of the most important railway lines in Europe, connecting Paris to the English Channel and into Belgium. James became the dominant figure in the French railway development. His influence over French infrastructure was enormous. Austria. Salomon financed the Kaiser Ferdinand's Nordbahn, the first major steam railway in the Austrian Empire, named after the emperor, showing the level of connection, gave the Rothschilds enormous influence over Austrian economic development. Britain, involved in various British railway investments, though the British market had more competition. Spain and beyond, financing railways across Spain and other European nations. Each railway project came with political influence attached. The deeper significance. Railway financing meant control over which regions developed economically, relationships with every level of government for permits and land, enormous ongoing revenue streams, physical infrastructure that shaped nations for generations. Relationships with European monarchies. The nature of these relationships. This is historically fascinating and important to understand accurately. The Rothschilds occupied a unique and paradoxical position. They were Jewish in deeply anti-Semitic societies, yet they were indispensable to the monarchies that presided over those societies. This created a complex dynamic of dependence and discrimination. Specific royal relationships. The British Crown. Nathan Rothschild had dealings with the British government under multiple monarchs. The family became bankers to the crown in a functional sense. Later generations had direct relationships with Queen Victoria's government. Lionel de Rothschild famously fought to become the first Jewish MP in British Parliament. Elected multiple times from 1847, refused to take the Christian oath, finally seated in 1858 after the oath was modified, a landmark moment for Jewish civil rights in Britain. The Habsburgs, Austria. Perhaps the closest royal relationship, Salomon Rothschild was essentially indispensable to the Habsburg court. Metternich famously said the Rothschilds had more power than any sovereign. Salomon was granted a baronetcy. Salomon was granted a baronetcy, extraordinary for a Jewish man at the time. The relationship was so close it caused resentment among Austrian aristocracy. The French monarchy and beyond. James Rothschild navigated multiple regime changes in France, maintained relationships with the restored Bourbon monarchy, the July monarchy under Louis Philippe. Louis Philippe actually visited James's estate at Ferrieres. I don't know how to say it. Ferriere. The Second Empire under Napoleon III, eventually the Third Republic. This ability to maintain influence across regime changes was remarkable. The papacy. Perhaps surprisingly, the Rothschilds became bankers to the Vatican. Karl Rothschild in Naples managed this relationship. The papacy needed financing like any sovereign power. This relationship gave them access to one of the most conservative institutions in Europe. Created interesting tensions given the church's historical anti-Semitism. The ennoblement of the family. Becoming nobility. The Austrian emperor granted the brothers baronetcies in 1822. They became the Barons de Rothschild. This was extraordinary, Jewish men being granted hereditary nobility. It both reflected and reinforced their power. Other European honors followed over time. What this meant. Access to aristocratic social circles previously closed to Jews, greater political influence, enhanced business credibility, but also resentment from traditional aristocracy. They existed in a strange space, honored but not fully accepted. Key political relationships beyond monarchs. Metternich and Salomon. Prince Clemens von Metternich was the dominant European statesman of the era, architect of the post-Napoleonic order. His relationship with Salomon Rothschild was remarkably close. They corresponded regularly, Metternich used Rothschild financial intelligence for political purposes. Salomon used Metternich's political influence for business purposes. A genuine partnership of mutual benefit. Benjamin Disraeli and Lionel de Rothschild. Benjamin Disraeli, British Prime Minister, had a lifelong friendship with the Rothschilds. Lionel de Rothschild was his close friend and financial backer. When Disraeli wanted to purchase the Suez Canal shares in 1875, the British government had no immediate funds available. Parliament was not in session. Disraeli needed £4 million. That's what it would be. Disraeli needed £4 million immediately. He sent a message to Lionel de Rothschild. Lionel provided the money within 24 hours. Britain secured a controlling interest in the Suez Canal, one of the most consequential financial transactions in imperial history. The Suez Canal is an artificial sea level waterway in Egypt, connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. What this did was effectively allow people to bypass Africa. They wouldn't have to go all the way around Africa. They could go through the Mediterranean and then through the Suez Canal to the Red Sea, then to Asia, right? And that is huge. That's huge. Why? Because oil was a huge factor at this point. The utilization of oil became more and more prevalent at this time, and that is where all the oil was. I would like to state that as well. The Ottomans controlled that for a long period of time, or they began. Yeah, I believe that's true. And of course, now Britain played a huge role in it. This was a big part of World War I because it was, and to date, it's a huge thing. Why? Because it's a major transport hub, yeah. The Suez Canal deal, deeper look. This deserves special attention as it illustrates Rothschild power perfectly. The situation 1875. Egyptian Khedive Ismail desperately needed money, offered his 177,000 Suez Canal shares for sale, represented approximately 44% of the canal. France was expected to buy them. Disraeli wanted Britain to have them instead. The transaction. Disraeli contacted Lionel de Rothschild directly, asked if N.M. Rothschild could provide £4 million. The transaction. Disraeli contacted Lionel de Rothschild directly, asked if N.M. Rothschild could provide £4 million. Lionel asked what the security was. Disraeli reportedly said the British government. Lionel approved the loan immediately. The shares were purchased before France could act. The significance. A private banking family enabled British imperial strategy, acting faster than any government institution could. This single transaction shaped Middle Eastern history profoundly. The canal remained under British influence until 1956. The Rothschild Intelligence Network. More than banking, by the mid-19th century, the Rothschild Information Network was legendary. How it worked. Agents in every major European capital, regular correspondence through private couriers, network of contacts in government, military, and commerce. Information was compiled and analyzed at the London and Paris House. What they knew. Political intelligence, government intentions, cabinet discussions, military intelligence, troop movements, war preparations, economic intelligence, harvests, trade flows, monetary conditions, personal intelligence, the finances and situations of key individuals. Why governments valued this. Rothschild intelligence was often better than government intelligence. Governments would sometimes share information in exchange for financial services, creating a feedback loop of intelligence and influence. Metternich explicitly used Rothschild agents for political information gathering. Social and cultural influence. the Rothschild estates and salons. Ferriere, I don't know how to say it. Ferriere, James Rothschild's estate. One of the most magnificent private estates in Europe, located outside Paris, designed by Joseph Paxton, who designed Crystal Palace, hosted royalty, politicians, artists, and intellectuals. Emperor Napoleon III visited, became a center of French cultural and political life. Waddesdon Manor, British Rothschilds, built by Baron Ferdinand de Rothschild in Buckinghamshire. I think I'd say that wrong. I'm not British, as you can see. I'm going to leave it there. Modeled on French Renaissance chateau, filled with one of the finest private art collections in Europe, Queen Victoria visited, now owned by the National Trust. Art and culture. The family became major patrons of the arts, collected old masters, French decorative arts, manuscripts, patronized living artists and musicians. Chopin performed at Rothschild salons. Their collections are now in major museums worldwide. The limit of their power. Important to note, despite their enormous influence, the Rothschilds faced real limits. Anti-Semitism was a constant reality. Despite their wealth, they faced social discrimination, excluded from certain clubs and institutions, subject to hostile press coverage. The power they wielded made them targets for conspiracy theories. Their success was used as supposed evidence of a Jewish financial conspiracy. They could not always prevent wars. The popular notion that the Rothschilds controlled all wars is mythology. Maybe. They did play both sides in wars, and they made killings off of war. They often tried to prevent conflicts because wars disrupted financial markets. They failed to prevent the Crimean War, failed to prevent the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. James Rothschild reportedly died heartbroken after Prussia defeated France. Competition increased. As the century progressed, new banking rivals emerged. J.P. Morgan, Barings Brothers, and others competed for business. Their dominance was real but not absolute. By the end of the 19th century, their position. What they had built, 5 major banking houses across Europe, involvement in virtually every major European government bond issue, controlling interests in railways across the continent, connections to virtually every European monarch and major statesman, the large private fortune in the history of the world to that point. Estimated wealth equivalent to roughly $1 trillion in modern terms by some calculations, though such comparisons are inherently imprecise. Their global reach. Beyond Europe, they had interests in Latin American sovereign debt, South African gold and diamond mining, North American railway and industrial financing, Asian trade financing. The key takeaways. The Rothschilds in the 19th century occupied a position no private family had held before or since, functioning as a quasi-sovereign financial institution whose, quote, cooperation was essential to the operation of the European state system. Their power came not from conspiracy, but from solving a genuine problem, the need for reliable, large-scale international finance, better than anyone else. Their relationships with monarchies and governments were transactional and symbiotic. Each needed the other, rather than the shadowy control depicted in conspiracy theories. Oh my lord. I'm likely gonna cut it off there.